Hi guys, I hope you had a good long spring break. I'm sorry that we're having to do it this way for the rest of the semester. I know that it's going to be a big transition, and it's gonna be tough. You know, some of you guys are at home with your parents, and that's stressful, or not being able to work and make money, and that's stressful. And so I know that this is a big shift and you guys are probably doing a great job, you know, trying to look at the bright side, but I know that it's hard. So I'm going to try to take that into account, you know, try to make this as easy as possible for you. So if at any point, you know, you feel like things are confusing or overwhelming, just let me know because I want to be accommodating in this troubling time. So with that being said, I hope that you're all healthy and coping okay. Again, let me know if you need anything. Um, so as for the structure, as I've posted in the announcements before, I'm going to be posting videos like this with our lecture slides every Tuesday and Thursday. And then the video for Tuesday, we'll have a quiz that's due Wednesday at midnight. The video for Thursday will have a quiz that's due Friday at midnight. So you'll have 2 full days to watch and quiz over Tuesday, and then 2 full days to watch and quiz over Thursday. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, let me know. If you have any questions, shoot me an email. And the reason I just want you guys to not have anything to worry about over the weekend. I want this to be kind of a Tuesday to Friday class that you have to worry about, and then don't think about it at all in the rest of those days. But I'm kind of just making this up as I go, so if we decide as a group, as a class, that something else would work better, then I'm going to be flexible and I'll make sure to post changes and any announcements and keep you guys 100% up to date on what the next move is for us if anything changes at all. I do ask that you guys please watch the video and listen to the lecture first before you take the quiz. I'm going to try to put at least one question into each quiz that you will not know unless you watch the video, so please watch the videos before you take the quizzes. I think listening to the content is a huge part of the class. Okay, let's see. I think a possible exception to this class structure of Tuesday, Thursday, and then the 2-day window for quizzes will be on test weeks. So since we are behind review days, we'll have to have lectures. So I think on the weeks that we'll have tests, I will post the lecture on Monday and then give you a couple days to take that quiz, probably by Wednesday at midnight still, and then open up the test from Wednesday to Sunday. So you'll have that window from Wednesday to Sunday night to take the test on the test days because we still have 2 tests left. One of them is coming up very shortly since that's the way it worked out. Okay, so if anything's confusing, anything's overwhelming, shoot me an email. Okay, I think that's all of the housekeeping I have. So let's get going on our slides. I'm going to go through them a little bit quicker than I would in class, just because you guys can pause and go back and re-listen if you need to. So hopefully these video lectures will be shorter than an hour 15. I'm going to try to shorten them, just give you kind of the need to know stuff. And hopefully you won't be sitting here for 3 hours a week. So another bright side. Okay, let's get rolling. So I just wanted to kind of refresh your memory on what we talked about a long time ago on chapter 8, memory. So I think the big key parts were the difference between explicit and implicit memories. So implicit memories are what we call non-declarative, without conscious recall. So things that we don't necessarily know that we know. skills that you've learned, riding a bike, for example, your associations that you've learned in classical conditioning that we talked about in chapter 7, your fear of dogs from that dog bite, your aversion to certain foods because of nausea that you've had before, a reaction to a dentist's office. So things that you have learned, but you wouldn't necessarily be able to declare that you know. Whereas explicit memories or declarative memories, you can say that you know. So you are able to say those because they're facts, they're events, they're things that happened that you effortfully processed and remember. So I think my little head is in the way of the other one. There we go. So what I wanted to add for today was kind of the two parts of explicit memory. So we have semantic memory and episodic memory that both fall under that branch of explicit memory. So semantic memory is our memory of facts and general knowledge. So the facts you learn in history class, the facts you learn in this class, anything that they say on Jeopardy is a semantic memory. It's a fact or general knowledge that they've learned. Whereas episodic memory is our personally experienced events. So episodic, the episodes of our life, the stories that you tell with your buddy, things that have happened in your family, memories from your childhood, just events that have happened to you, as opposed to general facts. So the two parts of explicit memory are semantic and episodic. So something that I think is important to know is this process of emotion and how emotion influences our memory. So we know that when we are excited, when our emotion is high, we trigger our stress hormones. Those stress hormones lead to increased activity in our brain, specifically in the part that forms memories. So when we have a big emotional event going on, our stress hormones trigger our brain to remember things, to increase our memory, which means that when we have a stronger emotional response, we have stronger, more reliable memories, right? Because this excitement says that something big is happening. Something's happening that we need to remember. So the brain interprets that as important and remembers it. And so this is kind of what happens with PTSD, right? This is kind of what leads to that. So, fighting in a war or being the victim of an assault, leads to really strong emotions, which leads to then very, very vivid memories. And so what happens in PTSD is people relive these traumas as though they're happening in real time, because those memories are so vivid, because the emotions were so strong whenever they were formed. Hope that makes sense. So stronger emotions, stronger, more reliable memories. So this is kind of related to this idea of flashbulb memories, or clear memories of very emotionally significant moments or events. So this is kind of your ability to recall exact information about, where you were and who you were with and what exactly you were doing at really highly emotional times. So for example, 95% of adults could recall exactly where they were and who they were with during the 9/11 attack. I don't know the exact stats on like the Joplin tornado, but I assume it's probably pretty high. Most people who were involved in that very highly emotional event have this flashbulb memory of that time and can remember exactly what it was like for them in that exact moment. Because the emotional response was so high, the memories are very strong and reliable. So something else that kind of improves our memory of events is making information and material that we're learning meaningful. So I think this kind of makes sense, right? Information is easier to remember when it is meaningful to us. This is kind of why your teachers, try to give you examples that you can relate to, or explain it in a way that puts it into context of your own life, because when material is meaningful to you, it's easier to remember. So Ebbinghaus, if you remember, he was the guy who looked at relearning, his speed of relearning. And he kind of remembered like nonsense syllables, and then tried to see how much more quickly he learned the list every day after he was relearning them. And he estimated that learning meaningful material required 1/10 of the effort compared to learning those nonsense syllables. So like if it was a list of names of your family members, he said that this would take him probably 1/10 of the time to remember that list because it's meaningful material to him. And this is kind of related to that self-reference effect. So we have especially good recall for information that we can relate to ourselves. You're more likely to remember an example of how classical conditioning works if it's applied to you and your life and things that you've been classically conditioned to know, as opposed to memorizing that a dog salivated to a bell. That's not relevant to your life necessarily. So learning classical conditioning in the context of, being happy when you smell your boyfriend's cologne might be easier to remember because of that self-reference effect. Let me see if I can make myself small again. Okay. So our ability to remember new information doesn't only depend on the time that we spend learning it. It also depends on whether or not that information is meaningful to us. So there's a lot more going on than just the work that we put into memorizing it. So retrieval cues and context-dependent memory. I talked about this in the substances chapter when we talked about drugs and alcohol and how they influence our memory, but I wanted to bring it up again since this is the memory chapter, and I think that this is really interesting and important and something that you can use in your own life. So if you remember, context-dependent memory is our increased ability to recall information when the context is the same when we learned it as it is when we try to retrieve it. So if you study with the same context as you test, you're going to do a better job at retrieving that information. If you're chewing the same gum when you study as when you test, that increases your recall. If you study in the same room as you're going to test in, that will improve your recall. If the brightness of the lights is the same, if you're listening to the same song, if the context is the same from when you encode to when you retrieve, you're going to have better retrieval. So something to keep in mind when you study, try to keep your context the same at both places. If you know what your testing environment is going to be like, try to keep your study environment similar. On a related note, state-dependent memory says that if our internal state is the same at encoding as it is at retrieval, we'll have better recall. So this one's less dependent on our context in our environment and more dependent on our internal states. So whether you're on a substance or not, remember we talked about if you study drunk, you'll do better drunk. If you study high, you'll do better high because your memory states match from encoding to retrieval. They're the same. Same thing with mood. If you're sad when you study, you'll have increased recall if you're sad when you test. Same thing with pain. People tend to remember times in their life that they were in pain when they're experiencing pain again. Kind of brings those memories back because our retrieval state matches what our state was when we were encoding that. Something kind of related to state-dependent memory is that our passions are exaggerated whenever we are in a certain state. So if we are in a bad mood, then we might read somebody else's maybe neutral face as being more negative than it is. Same thing if we're in a good mood, we might encode the same kind of neutral look as being more positive or a better emotion on someone's face, because our emotional state is influencing how we're perceiving them. Okay, so work with me here. I'm going to do an example that I was going to do in class, but you guys are sitting behind your computers at home, so I hope you'll play along and do it with me anyway. So get out a sheet of paper or your phone notes, whatever, just something that you can write something down. You can pause it or whatever, get that out, because I'm going to read you a list, and don't do anything yet. I'm going to read the list, and then whenever I'm done with the list, I'm going to ask that you write down as much as you can remember. So when you're ready, you can push play. House, dog, toy, pencil, dance, shoe, moon, phone, farm, paper, book, chair. Okay, write down as many as you remember. Pause, and then you can push play whenever you've written them all down. Don't go back and re-listen. Just write down as many as you remember. Okay, so I guess there's no way of knowing which words that you guys remembered, but I would bet that the majority of your words fell either at the end of the list or at the beginning of the list. So the first three words were house, dog, and toy, and the last three words were paper, book, and chair. I bet a lot more of you guys had those ones than you had the ones in the middle, which were dance, shoe, moon, phone. That's because of the serial position effect. So this is our tendency to best recall information at the beginning and ends of lists. So for example, if you start a new job, you're introduced to a lot of people when you start. Odds are at the end of the day, you've been introduced to so many new names. When you come in the next day, you're probably only remembering the first couple people that you met and maybe the last couple people that you met because of the serial position effect. We also see kind of we call it the recency effect and the primacy effect. So the recency effect is your increased recall for things at the end of the list, the most recent things that you heard. And then the primacy effect is better recall for the things at the beginning of the list, the first things that you heard. So we kind of see an increase on both spectrums, but the serial position effect is our ability to kind of recall both of those better than we would in the middle. So something to keep in mind if you're like giving a speech or giving a presentation of some kind, the things that people are going to remember are the things at the beginning and the end. So make sure that those are really strong. When you're writing a paper, make sure that your intro and your conclusion are really strong, because that's what's going to stick out for people. That's what we remember the best. So talking about memory, something that we need to talk about is forgetting, right? Because this is kind of the opposite of memory, is the absence of it. So we can forget at any stage. We can fail to encode information, we can fail to retrieve information, and we also see this, what we call interference, and I'll talk about that in a second. So at every stage, we see, our sensory memory, we're getting all of that information, the lights in the room, all of the visual stimuli, everything that you hear, that's all sensory information, and we're only gonna remember a little bit of it. So we're forgetting at that stage. And then what we do take in, the most important parts, the most important visual and auditory stimuli, we're going to hold it for a second, And if we don't encode it fully, if we don't really like write it down and practice it and try to remember it, it's going to be lost. If we do store it long term, we do remember, we do practice, and we put it into our long term memory, we can hold on to it, and then whenever it's time to get it back out, we can fail to do it. We can forget it at that point too. So some things are either changed in our memory or lost there. So we can forget at any stage of memory. Yeah, kind of a visual of where we're failing. So we can fail right here. These external events, we can kind of fail to get some of these. We can fail to pay attention fully and get it all into our short-term memory. We can fail to encode it, and we can fail to retrieve it. So something else that's involved in this process of forgetting is interference. So we have proactive interference and retroactive interference. Proactive interference is when prior learning disrupts our ability to remember new information. So for example, when you were in school, you had a locker combination, a new one every year, right? So you know your locker combination, you've got it down, but then the next year you have to remember a new combination. But that prior knowledge of that old combination kind of makes it tough to start remembering this new one, because every time you start to put it in at the beginning of the year, you're kind of thinking about the old one. That old information is getting in the way, is interfering with your ability to remember this new one. Whereas retroactive interference is when new learning disrupts the recall of old information. So by the end of the year, you've got your combination down, you know, you're not having that proactive interference anymore, you know what your combination is, you've got it. But then if I asked you to remember last year's combination, it might be kind of tough to remember the old one, because that new information, the new combination, has disrupted your ability to remember that old one. So that one is retroactive interference, when this new learning, this new combination, makes it hard to recall your old combination. And then proactive interference is when at the beginning of the year, if an old combination makes it hard to learn a new one. Hope that makes sense. Rewatch it again if it didn't. Shoot me an email if you need to. So I've talked about before how sleep is really important for memory, and like when you study, it's really good to take a nap right afterwards. And a lot of that has to do with retroactive interference. So we see that if people take a nap after they go to sleep, or I'm sorry, after they study, we see that their recall is a lot better than if they stay awake. Because if they stay awake, then there's a lot more information coming in that leads to this retroactive interference, new information that interferes with our ability to recall that older information. So if you go to sleep, there's not more information that's getting in the way of what you learned. It's encoded better. So take naps when you study. Okay, so Freud said that one of the things that leads to our forgetting is motivated forgetting. So sometimes we lose information because we want to, because it's our brain's way of getting rid of painful memories, embarrassing memories, to protect our self-concept and kind of minimize our anxiety. However, today's researchers don't agree with that. They say that this repression, this idea of motivated forgetting, doesn't really happen, because forgetting usually happens when information is unimportant, when it's neutral, when it's not emotional, when it's not, you know, this super embarrassing, painful memory. Because oftentimes we do have these intrusive memories of those traumatic experiences, those embarrassing memories that we would like to most forget. So we're not forgetting those things. Those are the things that we remember the most because they're really emotional. Remember, we talked about highly emotional things lead to highly, very strong memories. We don't forget those memories usually that we want to forget. That's usually not the case. Sometimes, I'm not going to say that never happens, but usually we're remembering those things when we don't want to. Another way that we could forget is amnesia. So if you get a brain injury, you could experience either of these things, anterograde amnesia or retrograde amnesia. So anterograde amnesia is our inability to form new memories. So if you've seen 50 First Dates, what's the girl's name? Did I write it down? No, I don't know what her name is. If you've seen 50 First Dates, what happens is every single day she wakes up and she has forgotten everything that's happened since her brain injury. So every day she kind of lives the same day over and over again because she does not have the ability to form new memories. The opposite of that would be retrograde amnesia, the inability to retrieve information from the past before the brain injury. So this would be like, what's the movie called? The Vow, the Sparks movie about the girl who gets in the car accident and forgets the whole past like 10 years of her life, forgets her husband, marrying her husband, moving out of her family's home. She lost the ability to retrieve information that she used to have. So anterograde amnesia, not being able to form new memories from the time of the brain injury. Retrograde amnesia is the inability to retrieve old memories before the brain injury. Something else that influences our ability to retrieve memories and retrieve true memories are these memory construction errors. So basically our memory is not exact, it's not precise. We don't retrieve memories exactly. We kind of recreate them every time we remember them. This was a quote in your textbook that says, our memories are flexible and superimposable, a panoramic blackboard with an endless supply of chalk and erasers. You don't have to write that down if you're taking notes, but essentially what they mean is that every time you remember something that happened, remember a fact, every time you remember something, you're actually just remembering the last time that you remembered it. And every time that you remember something, it can be altered just a little bit and kind of change the way that you consolidate it. So reconsolidation is when our previously stored memories are potentially altered before being stored again. So you pull that out of your long-term memory, you think about it, and it might be changed a little bit, and then you store it again in that kind of altered state, and then you pull it out again, you might change it even a little bit more, and our memories are kind of rewoven that way. So don't trust yourself. Another memory reconstruction error is this misinformation effect. So it is the corruption of a memory by misleading information. Essentially what that means is that hearing things that aren't true can change your memories. Even if you know that they're not true, like if you tell yourself a lie over and over and over again, you can start to believe it as a true memory. If we show people fake pictures of like family vacations in their childhood, they'll start to have extremely vivid, detailed memories of that trip and that picture when it never happened. So we can be exposed to things that aren't true and slowly start to take them as fact. So keep that in mind when you're in an argument, spreading information on media, etc. So this is kind of an example of a misinformation effect. So in this experiment, people were showed a clip of a car accident, and then they were later asked a leading question about the accident. So they were either asked, how fast were the cars going? when the accident occurred. Or they were asked, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? So asking a question with that leading word like smashed or banged into each other, collided with each other. Asking something like that will make people believe and remember something that wasn't exactly accurate. So we'll make them recall the accident as much more serious than it really was because of that misinformation that they're getting. Another memory construction error is source misattribution. So this is faulty memory of how or when or where you learned information. So this is kind of the heart of a lot of our false memories. So if you overhear someone talking about the coronavirus, and then later on you might tell somebody that same information because you misattribute the source. Maybe you remember hearing that on the news or hearing that somewhere reliable when actually you heard it from someone in the grocery store, and it might not have been true because you don't really remember, or you misattribute where you got that source from. This is what happens like when you tell a friend a story or a new fact and they're like, yeah, I told you that. That's you doing a source misattribution. You misremembered where you heard it from. You thought you heard it from the news or read it online, but actually they were the one that told you, and it's wildly embarrassing because you're stealing their credits. Right? Happen to anybody else? Nope. Okay. Okay, so that's all I've got for you today. Your quiz should be posted, so you will have until Wednesday at midnight to quiz over this lecture, and then I will post the next one on Thursday. If you have any questions at all, shoot me an email. I'm happy to clear anything up. See you guys.